We have to remember that children born today are exposed to these chemicals from birth, perhaps even before birth. Now, what is going to happen to them in adult life as a result of that exposure? We simply don't know.
Tons of DDT are used in this fight against the dread disease, whose principal target is the young. Again, war has contributed one of its discoveries to save life.
One way to open your eyes is to ask yourself, what if I had never seen this before? What if I knew I would never see it again? This is a quote taken from the 1937 book Under Siege, written by Rachael Carson, and it reflects an important concept, which is we interact with one another. And she noticed that the push and pull was being manipulated, which has negative consequences on other parts of life, on our part of life. We're just a part of the balance. And Rachael Carson made a difference being a marginalized part of the socio-economic ecosystem. She was a woman at the turn of the century, but she used her experience and her talents to make a movement which resulted in legislation being written. She noticed a problem and she used her talents to fix it.
These sprays, dusts, and aerosols are now applied almost universally to farms, gardens, forests, and homes. Non-selective chemicals that have the power to kill every insect, the good and the bad, to still the song of birds and the leaping of fish in the streams. All this, though the intended target may be only a few weeds or insects.
Rachael Carson was born in 1907 in a small Pennsylvania farming village, and she's excelled at writing and poetry. In fact, she was nationally published before she turned 10. Later on in her life, she went on to pursue a bachelor's degree at the Pennsylvania College for Women. During the junior year of this experience, she was required to take a biology course, which kind of rekindled love and appreciation that she had for nature. She went on to Johns Hopkins University to obtain a master's degree in zoology. In 1936, Rachael was hired by the U.S. Marine and Wildlife Services, which kind of sparked a new interest for her for environmental biology. And she began to study, make her own observations, and record her own data. The way she would present her data to the public was through literary works. The books that she wrote, such as Under Siege, Under the Sea Wind, The Sea Around Us, they were all very poetically presented, and that was a type of rhetoric that she used in order to communicate her message to a specific audience. And these books were received by the public. She published her first book, and maybe local response would get it. And as she continued to publish books, her audience gained. But consistently throughout the works is that the poetry and the way that she presented the data, it got to people. She used her talents as a writer in order to communicate her biological understanding and the effects that we had on other parts of the world.
A spokesman for the chemical industry, Dr. Robert White Stevens.
The major claims in Miss Rachael Carson's book, Silent Spring, are gross distortions of the actual facts, completely unsupported by scientific experimental evidence and general practical experience in the field. If man were to faithfully follow the teachings of Miss Carson, we would return to the Dark Ages, and the insects and diseases and vermin would once again inherit the earth.
So what exactly is the DDT dilemma? In 1945, the chemical DDT, which was a pesticide, entered mass production, and they began to spray this chemical over fields and fields of farmland. And the claim of DDT was that it could kill off the insects and the bad weeds that you don't want, but it would preserve everything else. Eventually, usage expanded from just farmland to people would, spray it down the streets, people would spray it in their houses. In fact, they began manufacturing several different products such as paint and other sprays that people could just take into their homes and paint their walls or spray their piano or their shoes or their silverware. whatever they were afraid would be infested with cockroaches or insects or whatever. But the claim was DDT was going to help you. And then research expanded and people began to believe that DDT was effective in fighting diseases such as polio. And they would, gather people together with the disease in a hospital, and then they would ventilate them with the chemical. And there was concern in the scientific community because other research couldn't be conclusive on what the full effects of DDT were. They didn't know to what extent of life DDT affected. They didn't know how much DDT was remaining in the plants after they sprayed them. They didn't know after, them spraying them in the ocean, what effect it had on marine life. They didn't know if it was killing off just the bacteria the initial scientists claimed it was, because nothing had been proven. And these scientific communities reached out to Rachael Carson and they said, hey, this is out of control and our claims to Congress and our claims are being ignored, and you have a voice in this community and we want you to write a book about it. And she did. She wrote A Silent Spring, which basically talked about, what the world would be like without the birds singing and what the possible effects of this chemical were. And initially, parts of the scientific community received this with outrage. They said, she's unsupported, she's unqualified, this isn't technical procedure, she's not following the scientific rules. But she had not enough of a voice that she actually got her argument to Congress, and John F. Kennedy ordered that her claims be reviewed. In 1967, a group of lawyers and scientists put together a fund called the Environmental Defense Fund, with the overall goal of banning DDT. And with that fund, they went on to sue the Department of Agriculture, saying DDT was unsafe and unproven in all of its effects. The DDT case was heard 7 times, but in the end, legislation was passed that banned DDT from United States use because there was effects in other parts of life. For example, DDT effects were prevalent in birds, and further studies suggested that birds in fact were affected by DDT on different amounts, and birds that had to go out and find their prey, such as the bald eagle, they had a more negative effect from DDT. The eggs that the bald eagle would lay, the white inside of the egg was literally thinning, and it was producing diseased animals. And this evidence suggested that we did not know everything on DDT, and we did not know the full effects.
Ms. Carson maintains that the balance of nature is a major force in the survival of man, whereas the modern chemist, the modern biologist, the modern scientist believes that man is steadily controlling nature.
Now, to these people, apparently the balance of nature was something that was repealed as soon as man came on the scene. Well, you might just as well assume that you could repeal the law of gravity. The balance of nature is built of a series of interrelationships between living things and between living things and their environment. You can't just step in with some brute force and change one thing without changing a good many others. Now, this doesn't mean, of course, that we must never interfere, that we must not attempt to tilt that balance of nature in our favor. But unless we do bring these chemicals under better control, we are certainly headed for disaster.
So who was Rachael Carson? She was born poor and she considered herself a writer. She was a biologist. She had a passion for natural life. She understood the negative consequences of endangering the biosphere. She understood the negative effect it would have on human beings. She fought the odds and criticism because she knew her standpoint was significant, and she inspired others, which kept her standpoints and her work moving forward, even after her death.